to PRI's podcast. I'm your host, Rowena Ichon. When Americans think of poverty in the U.S., they think of Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas, and New Mexico. The last thing on their mind is California, which Kerry Jackson in this podcast says is a land of plenty in the land of plenty. Well, the fact is, California has the highest poverty rate in the nation. More than 20% of Californians are living in poverty. Here I delved into the state's poverty issues with its newly released study, Good Intentions, How California's Anti-Poverty Programs Aren't Delivering, and How the Private Sector Can Lift More People Out of Poverty. The author of the study is Kerry Jackson, PRI Fellow at our Center for California Reform. In this podcast, Tim and I, PRI's Director of Communications, and I discussed the new study with Kerry. He looks at the history of poverty in the state and why, despite the many billions of dollars spent, government's efforts to alleviate poverty have mostly failed. He contrasts this to the many faith-based organizations and nonprofits doing a far better job in helping people climb out of poverty. Thanks for listening. Welcome to PRI's podcast, Kerry. Perhaps one of the most surprising things a casual reader will learn when picking up Good Intentions is that California has the nation's highest poverty rate. Please share with our listeners some of your findings about California's high poverty rate.
It's a different rate that we're looking at in this. It's not a conventional poverty rate. It's called the supplemental poverty measure, and it's another way to look at poverty that the Census Bureau has started some roughly 6 years ago. And this takes into consideration other issues. According to their language, it extends the official poverty measure by taking account of the many government programs designed to assist low-income families and individuals that are not included in the current official poverty measure. And California, the most recent numbers, is at 20.4%, and I believe that's about 8 million in the population of roughly 40 million. We can do the math, but that's the number and the proportion living in poverty. And every year that Census has done this, and I said it's going back about 6 years, and it's a 3-year running average, I'll have to say that. California has always had the highest poverty measure. And you would not think this. This is supposed to be the land of plenty within the land of plenty, yet there it is, and you have to wonder, why is this the case? So these are the things that continually caught my eye as I was looking into it.
So you raised the question, and I'll ask you just that. Why is poverty so high in really one of the wealthiest places, not only in the nation, but on Earth? What did you find that are the causes of California's poverty problem? And I wonder, too, does geography play a role in this at all?
Geography does play a role. The coastal parts of California, as most people know, is quite wealthy. Once you get inland, the wealth but the wealth does diminish. Not that there aren't some rich people inland, and not that there aren't some poor people on the coast, but it is, if you look at it, the wealth is concentrated on the coast. There are issues. California is very aggressive. The legislature, the government is very aggressive, not only at the state level, but at county, city levels, has been very aggressive in trying to eradicate poverty. And I think that's probably one of the bigger problems, is their attempts have been all wrong. And they have actually exacerbated the problem, institutionalized and extended poverty. Also, there are other issues. That housing is big, and we've written about housing before. When so much of your income has to go to your housing, there's very little left over sometimes for other things, and this can cause poverty issues as well. California has a hostile business climate, so the economy is not working as well as it should. So these are some of the other contributing factors. But a primary cause, you're always going to have poverty. If you're a reader of the New Testament, you will remember that Jesus said, "The poor you will have with you always." So that's just part of humanity. There's always going to be a portion of people who are poor, no matter what anybody else does. But it doesn't have to be, the portions don't have to be as big as they are, but California tends to, as I say, provide incentives with government programs to institutionalize poverty through generations.
So, Kerry, California has its share of government programs to combat poverty, and you spent a significant part of the paper evaluating these programs for their effectiveness. Give California a grade on how it's doing on poverty. How are state policymakers doing overall in fighting poverty? What programs are working? Which ones are you concerned about?
I'm tempted to just give them an F, considering where the state is and compared to the rest of the country. One other thing I did not mention is that the supplemental poverty measure being at 20.4%, most recent number. The national average is 14.7%. So we can see how difficult it is to live in California compared to other states. I just think that the approach by policymakers is all wrong. They may be well-intentioned approaches. They may have the poor's best interest at heart, but at the same time, they should know that what they're doing is not working. If I had to pick out a program that I thought was helpful, I would say any of the programs that require work of the recipients of the program benefits. And this has been shown in other states too, particularly Wisconsin and Michigan, who started these anti-poverty programs and work requirements quite some time ago. And anytime you are going to require somebody to work, it does, I would say, help the overall issue. Any program that requires work is at least better than a program that doesn't, if we can put it that way.
Kerry, I'm going to go into that a little more about what other states have done. You spend a chunk of your issue brief reviewing what other states, often with great success, have done to combat high poverty rates there and get their citizens back on their feet. What one or two lessons can California lawmakers learn from these other states as they consider reforms to our state's government anti-poverty programs?
Well, it'll be tough on the work requirement. If you're giving something away at no expense to someone, then they're going to surely keep coming back for more. If you're requiring them to work, then they're having to put something in. And requiring the work is just a way to keep moving out of poverty. It's not work and poverty benefits. It's the goal is to eventually get everybody out of the benefits, out of the tights that they are in, the straits they're in, I should say, and have everybody working and contributing, or at least as many as possible. As I said, Michigan and Wisconsin were known for this, going back to Governor John Engler in Michigan. Actually, the early 90s is when they started their reforms, and they moved through a lot of different reforms, shall we say, or forms of reform. Wisconsin was a few years behind with Governor Tommy Thompson. But if you look back at when they started requiring work requirements, the roles fell. And, so that to me indicates that there's some people who were being beneficiaries of poverty programs who probably should not have been on there to begin with. So they were getting something for nothing and found out that wasn't always going to work.
Kerry, the heart of your study focuses on private charities and nonprofits that are doing a far better job in lifting people out of poverty than our current state programs. You profile several of them in your brief. Can you share with our listeners a couple of these programs that are already making a big difference?
There's St. John's Program for Real Change. This is one that came to mind, 6 locations in Sacramento. And they, like other groups, the Solutions for Change is another in California. They tend to strike at the root of the problem rather than just handing money out, as we've seen through government programs. They try to change people's lives. They try to work with people to get them ready for work. It's a matter of changing people's lives for the most part. And these are things that the government is not equipped to do. You have people coming in, applying for the poverty programs or for the benefits, but nobody knows their story and nobody knows how to get them, or maybe doesn't even care in the bureaucracy, how to get them out of poverty, how to move them ahead. And this is what these private groups are good at. They can go one-on-one. Government can't do that, not equipped. They can be discerning as to what's going on. They often require sobriety, sometimes testing. And they make sure the people understand what it is to go out and become a productive member of the society as opposed to just being stuck in a bad situation. There was a fellow who has a larger group nationwide called America Works, and he pointed out that generally speaking, his experiences, people did want. They're not the majority of people did not want to be on the poverty rolls. They wanted to be productive and get out of their situation. And these are just things the government cannot do and is not equipped to do. So this is where the private organizations really shine.
Well, Kerry, I can really echo those sentiments. I've had the opportunity to tour St. John's program program for Real Change here in Sacramento, and our colleague Lance Azumi and I interviewed their CEO, Michelle Steeb, for another episode of PRI's podcast. And it was really impressive to see that really individualized approach to helping people. They're so enthusiastic to want to change their lives and get back on their feet. And really, it's also, too, it's not just about them, it's about their children and making a better life for their children. And we were most impressed to see they have a program called Plates, which is their kind of restaurant hospitality management program. And it's actually one of the best places you could have lunch in the Sacramento area. Their food is really good, but it's really impressive to see the transformation in people's lives. I mean, it's so obvious when you meet the clients of St. John's. So
it's unfortunate that not everybody has the family background that all of us, some of us do, and have that work ethic and still have the work ethic, but responsibilities and are shown examples of how you go through life. Not everybody has that opportunity. And these groups, as you say, and you use the perfect word, individualize their attempts. And, they are able to show what it means when you have responsibility, where that gets you in life. It's not everybody starts at the same place, but we can all do better. And if the private sector is doing its job, I think it's helping people move to better places.
And it's a shame, too, that we see instead of really embracing nonprofits like St. John's, government is in some cases actively working against them. St. John's gets a small portion of their funding from Sacramento County, but actually they're fighting them because they require sobriety and they require this is a single-sex environment. It's just for mothers and their children. That they're not allowing men in there when in many cases these women are there escaping, that dangerous environment from their husbands or boyfriends. So what's your view? Shouldn't government really be partnering with these nonprofits rather than treating them as an adversary?
Well, it certainly shouldn't treat them as an adversary. And maybe the best way it can be a partner is to not be an adversary. They can encourage these groups in ways that would help them expand what they're doing. I assume they could refer, shall we say, clients to these groups rather than getting them on the government rolls where they stay sometimes for generations, sadly. A lot of these groups do not like to have any kind of government money coming in. And as you say, there's a problem at St. John's with the drug testing, the sobriety. And the government will not help because of that particular requirement they have at St. John's, which they're not going to give up on. You have to, say, stand by your principles, which they're doing. If you're not sober, it is kind of hard to hold a job.
Well, and the other thing, too, that you talked about a little bit in your housing brief was that government's attitude from the feds on down is a housing first approach, which means, we're going to put you in housing. If you're homeless or down on your luck, we're going to put you in housing first, which sounds good, but you're not changing hearts and minds. You're not getting that person on the path to a self-sufficient life.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a crutch, too, for the people. Well, everything's good now. I've got a place to go at night, and I can spend the rest of my days doing what I want to if this person happens to be an addict or an alcoholic. You're right. Nothing gets changed. We go back to America Works, which is a nationwide nonprofit private organization. Again, the founder is named Peter Cove. He found the jobs. Putting someone to work as fast as possible is the best way to get them out of poverty. Not giving them a cot for the night or for the week or for the month, but getting them to work as soon as they possibly can.
Kerry, it seems like people naturally turn to government for help when they're down on their luck. And based on your findings, it seems like government has had the effect of addicting people to entitlements rather than giving them a hand up and helping them out of poverty. What's your view on this, and what do you think is a proper role for government in helping people in need?
Well, it's certainly true, and I think I mentioned this earlier. They institutionalize poverty in some respects with the incentives that the government programs put out there to the people. But the government's role should be severely limited to only the few who are so disabled that they can't possibly help themselves. They have no families. They have no institutional associations. Essentially, wards of the state, you could say. There are a lot of healthy people out there who don't need assistance the way the government gives them. They need assistance from the fellow man who can help them. Again, we talked about these nonprofit private institutions. That's the kind of help they need. That is the kind of hand up, reaching down to help pull them up. And the numbers of people, I would say, who can need the very limited, what should be a very limited government involvement, would not be in the millions. As I mentioned, that there's about 8 million who fall under the new poverty measure in California. And so we move that across this country. It's not going to be times 50 because California is the biggest state, but it's going to be in the tens of millions. There's just simply not that many people who need that. What they need, again, is the fellow man reaching out and saying, we know how to get you out of this. Let's do it.
After all of your research and putting together this great brief, Good Intentions, which our listeners can download a copy of at pacificresearch.org, Kerry, what are your top 2 or 3 policy recommendations that you have for California lawmakers to address the problems with the state's anti-poverty programs?
Well, I mentioned housing. That's just something that's got to be dealt with. The housing needs to be affordable in this state. It simply isn't. People need to be paying much smaller portions of their income to live in decent housing. I mentioned the business climate. That needs to be fixed as well. It's fairly well known that there is a hostility toward business in the state. We didn't mention energy costs, but energy is very expensive in California. And, we need policies that are going to change that. Again, you're spending a big portion of your income on things that are going to leave less money available for other necessities. And finally, I would just say to lawmakers, again, at all levels, it's not even not just confined to the state, local, as well as federal. Stop trying to be something that you're not. You are not a private organization that has a discernment and the interest that a private organization does. Don't be, and I hate to use this phrase, but it comes to mind right away, don't be the sugar daddy. You find out what your role is, and it's not what you think it is. So again, stop trying to be something that you're not.
So Kerry, we're at the end of our podcast, and it's a time when we ask our guests for a wine recommendation. You mentioned in the last podcast that you love finding bargain wines located at the bottom shelves of the grocery store. Have you found any lately, and what's a good one that you can recommend to our listeners?
Nothing lately, but I have an old go-to, and I've only found this at Trader Joe's. It might be available at others, but it is a Rabbit Ridge Allure de Roble, which is a Paso Robles Rhone-style wine, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, and it's really about, anywhere, I think years ago it was about $5 a bottle. It may have gone up to $6, a little more, but for the money, it's a fantastic little bottle of wine. Again, Rabbit Ridge out of Paso Robles.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Thanks again to our guests, Kerry Jackson and to Tim Anaya. To download the study Good Intentions, go to PRI's website at pacificresearch.org. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or TuneIn. And please do us a favor and give us 5 stars. You can also listen to our podcast on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/PacificResearch1. That's the number 1. Also, check out our blog Right by the Bay on our website at pacificresearch.org. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. We hope you'll come back again for another episode of PRI's podcast.